Hey guys, it's Jennifer Party, and today I wanted to talk to you about the Venus cycle. In general, a little bit, but also in particular, the new Venus cycle in Leo. So a lot of you guys probably follow astrology a bit, or maybe you watched my previous video in which I mentioned that we were about to start the Venus retrograde in Leo. So a lot of people are aware of the Venus retrograde that's been happening the last 3 or 4 weeks. And it is something that we go through. Actually, Venus spends less time retrograde than most all of the other planets. Perhaps the least time, actually, in retrograde. So it's a fairly rare phenomena for her. But every 1.5 years or so, she does go retrograde for about 6 weeks. And so we're midway through that retrograde right now. We still have a few weeks left. But what some of you guys might not know about is that there is a Venus cycle that reoccurs. Venus goes retrograde in 5 different signs, and these signs actually make a beautiful, if you were to map it, it would make a beautiful pentagram, a 5-pointed star. So it's a pretty cool pattern. She goes retrograde in 5 different signs, and they rotate so that every 8 years she comes back to a sign that she was previously retrograde in. So the last time she was retrograde in Leo was 8 years ago. And the previous retrograde before this Leo cycle that we're currently beginning was in Capricorn. And that started 1.5 years ago, roughly, at the beginning of 2022. So I just thought we'd unpack that a little bit and talk about maybe a couple of themes to look for, what this cycle might mean. I might give you some ideas for a spread that I came up with earlier this week. I actually haven't tried it for myself yet. I've tried it with a client, but it's something that you could use if you want to unpack the themes of the Venus cycle in Leo a bit. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Oh, and then the other thing is just talking a little bit more about Venus cycles in general. So as I just mentioned, Venus was previously, her last retrograde was in Capricorn 1.5 years ago. But part of thinking about planetary cycles is expanding our view and really seeing how themes carry through. And this is true not just of Venus, but of many planetary cycles. For example, if you were to track the lunar cycle every month, yes, we have a new moon in a theme, you know, a new moon in a sign that carries a theme. But then, you know, the idea is that you would work with, if you're a magical practitioner or you just enjoy working with planetary or lunar cycles, you would work with that lunar theme for the whole month. So maybe you set a wish or an intention under the new moon, and then the idea is to grow that through the full moon, and then to wrap up that cycle under the waning moon, and then with the new moon, the next new moon, you begin a new theme, a new cycle. So a lot of us are aware of this idea of working with cycles when it comes to the moon, especially in kind of a New Age context or a magical context. But we're not as familiar with working with Venus cycles. So the way a Venus cycle works, like I said, it's roughly 1.5 years between her retrograde periods. So a new Venus cycle would begin during the retrograde when Venus meets up with the sun. And this is what happened in January of 2022 when Venus met up with the Sun in Capricorn. And then that cycle carried through until just this past week, just this past weekend, when Venus met up with the Sun again, but in Leo. So rather than just thinking about Venus being retrograde for 6 weeks, I mean, it does wreak some havoc, yes, sometimes with our relationships. It's a time to reassess our values. You've probably been having a lot of these kinds of themes come up that you have noticed, you know, Venus themes that are under review, which is what we do during a retrograde. It's a time to pause and consider and regroup and integrate. So you probably have noticed that, but I want you to expand your view to be aware of and start considering the larger Venus cycle as a whole. Okay? So the last Venus cycle, as I mentioned, took place in the sign of Capricorn. And Capricorn is a winter sign. It's ruled by Saturn. It's an earth sign. So for the last year and a half, we were focused on gradually building something. You know, let me set a goal for myself and take steps progressively to achieve that. Let me work towards something steadily. Now there is a second half of the Venus cycle, and as we go deeper, which I'm not sure how deep I'll get into it today, but I could unpack this further in future videos. But there is a second half to the Venus cycle because Venus also has phases where she is a morning star and an evening star. So Venus did meet up with the Sun again in the sign of Libra last fall, and then she became evening star, but she was not retrograde at that time. So it's another part of the integration is to, and the nuances of the Venus cycle is to work with these distinct phases of morning star and evening star Venus, in addition to working with the theme that was initiated when the retrograde cycle started and when she became a morning star. So, Venus, for the last year and a half, she was in a more Saturnian kind of mode of building things. And then in the last half of her cycle in Libra, it was all about relationships and kind of fine-tuning those aspects of our lives that needed harmony in order to achieve the things that we set out to achieve. Now, Venus is beginning this new cycle in Leo. She is in her morning star phase again. And what that means is that she wants to initiate something new. She wants to be in her more fiery or individualistic aspect again. When Venus is in her evening star phase, she is in the larger context of taking her place in society and of hosting and providing space for other people. When she is in her morning star aspect, she is more young, fiery, full of personality and new projects and ideas, and she's willing to put herself out there in order to forge something new, in order to express something individualistically. It's a more bold version of Venus when she's in her morning star phase, as opposed to a more host, spacious, accommodating Venus when she's in her evening star phase, shall we say. So we've finished the recent Venus cycle in Capricorn. We finished Venus as an evening star. We've been going through several weeks of Venus retrograde, in which we have been taking stock and making a note of things that work for us and things that don't work for us. And for me personally, this has been coming up in terms of like receiving different offers to perform in different contexts. I'm thinking that's partially because of Venus being retrograde in Leo, and also maybe some of the vestiges of the Libra part of the cycle, with connections with other people. That's how it's personally been coming up for me during this Venus retrograde, has been people offering different opportunities for me with performing, but then like really pausing and considering and being like, you know, I'll try this thing, but I don't really know if it's worth the investment. And then I'll say yes to another thing, but then realize, no, that's definitely not where my heart is. And then I'll say yes to another thing and realize, oh yes, that is where my heart is, but that's gonna take me some time to grow. So I know for other people, the Venus themes that have been coming up during this retrograde are maybe not as much about performing, which is a Leonine activity, but more in terms of relational difficulties, which can certainly come up with Venus retrograde, because the normal kind of harmony has been disrupted. We can't take our normal relational rhythms for granted. And the area of life where Venus is under review, sorry for the noise in my hallway, my neighbors. The area of life where Venus is under review is really going to depend on which house she's gone retrograde in. So that's going to vary considerably for different people. But no matter which theme is coming up for you, Venus in this new cycle is not so much about the Saturnian gradual building. It's of Capricorn. It's not so much about the harmonizing of Libra that we've recently been going through those two things. It's about shining. It's about fire. It's about what lights me up. What am I passionate about? And one interesting thing that I've noticed recently and personally, it just kind of bumped into it over the last few days due to some Facebook ads, is I ran into a lady named Nicole Dedon, who she wrote a book called Slow Sex, and she was the founder of Orgasmic Meditation, and she wrote these books called the Arrow Cycles, or the Arrow Sutras, Arrow Sutras. And that seems very Venusian, but also there's some beautiful stuff in there. I am intrigued, but there's also an element that feels kind of forbidden. And Nicole is a controversial figure in herself, so I'm kind of looking into some of that. But it brings in another dimension of what is happening with this Venus and Leo cycle. So yes, passion, yes, sharing our heart, yes, being willing to be on stage and on fire for something, but also this element of the forbidden and what is acceptable versus what should remain hidden, I think comes in a different layer, which is the fact that Venus also recently met up with the Black Moon Lilith. So Black Moon Lilith is hanging out right now about 25 degrees of Leo. Just met up with the Sun, just met up with Venus. And the conjunction between Venus and the Sun was only a couple of degrees away from Lilith. So notice, like, for you, what is it that ignites your desire? What is it that you long to say yes to? And then how does fear interrupt that? Or what are the dark emotions that come up? Or what are you afraid to touch because you're like, that's too hot, or that's not okay, or I would be getting into really dicey territory if I did this? Because I think some of what we're going to be unpacking over the next year and a half with this Venus in Leo cycle is exactly that. The nature of sharing our heart and following our passion, and how raw are we willing to be, and how, I want to say, how do our ethics meet our heart? But also, you need to become your own arbiter of truth and be deeply honest with yourself. What is it that I need? What is it that I love? And am I acting in integrity? And that doesn't just mean like, I don't think it's the moral purist kind of integrity. I don't think that's what Venus is interested in. Arrow Sutras is not about a puritanical way of being. It is about an authentic honoring of the desire for something larger to yourself and surrendering to that. Surrendering to the fact that our passions have intelligence to them. That when we are drawn to share our voice and our heart and it feels pure and authentic, it is for a reason. And yet, we might need to sift through some of our own dark emotions, some of our fears, desires to hold on or grab things that really aren't ours. We may need to learn how to surrender and purify and trust the flow of our desire while being in personal integrity and staying connected to our passion and our heart. So that to me feels like a central theme of the next year and a half, this cycle that we're just beginning with Venus in Leo. Now, why do I say again the next year and a half? Because of course, Venus isn't going to stay in Leo for a year and a half, but there is a more complex cycle that unfolds with Venus. Every time she begins a 1.5-year cycle, after the retrograde, she goes, well, she meets up, so first she meets up with the sun during the retrograde, right? And then after the retrograde ends, she meets up with the moon 7 times while she is in her morning star phase, her young, initiatory, fiery, individualistic phase. Venus morning star was sometimes referred to as Venus Luciferia, which I think is so interesting because Lucifer was referred to as the morning star. So there's a conflation there, which is kind of interesting. But Venus meets up with the moon 7 times while she is direct, after she turns direct. And this is our opportunity to embody our individualistic purpose that she has set out for us during her meetup with the sun. So once she goes direct, there will be 7 stages of learning to embody and express, but also needing to kind of purify. And the interesting thing is that Venus, when she is in her morning star phase, her journey can be correlated to the story of Inanna. And maybe I'll get into this more in a future video. But Inanna, who was an ancient Sumerian goddess and who is associated with the cycles of Venus that came, well, we didn't call Inanna Venus until later in Greece. But Inanna has to, in order to become not just the Queen of Heaven, but the Queen of Heaven and Earth, she has to go through a cycle or a process in which she meets her dark sister, Ereshkigal, in the underworld. And in order to meet her dark sister, she has to surrender something. So there is this descent of Inanna that goes through 7 gates or 7 phases. And this correlates, the descent of Inanna matches up with the 7 meetings that Venus has with the moon. She'll meet up with the moon basically once a month in a different sign, and you work through a theme. This can be correlated with the chakras. That's oftentimes how I work with it, is working through the 7 chakras, working through the 7 signs, in order to unpack layers of what Venus needs to surrender and purify in her individualistic journey in order to become something greater, something more whole, and also to prepare herself to meet with her own shadow, to meet with her own dark sister, Ereshkigal. And then essentially Venus disappears and she meets up with the sun again while she's direct. And then she will begin the second half of her cycle as an evening star, and she will ascend and gradually reclaim the 7 different aspects of self that she has surrendered, but in a new context, in a more whole context, serving the greater collective during her evening star phase. So this is the larger cycle of Venus, and I love working with the Venus cycle as a whole, but it all starts here. It all starts with the seed moment of Venus meeting up with the sun. So I want you to notice what messages you are receiving now, or what themes are coming up in your life that give you clues about what Venus wants to unpack for you over the next year and a half. Where is it that you can shine more? Where is it that your eros, or your desire, your heart wants to pour into? What is it that you're afraid of? Where is that raw passion and that desire for something greater? And where is the desire to share with others? In what aspect of life is that coming up for you? So, it's a bit about the Venus cycle, and specifically the Venus cycle that we're starting in Leo, that will be running for the next year and a half. I know I was a bit rambly there. And I think the last thing that I want to offer you, if you want to go deeper, is a spread that you can use specifically related to this Venus cycle in Leo. So this is for those of you who like to work with tarot or oracle cards. And I'm going to do a sample spread for myself. I'm not going to go terribly deep into it, but just to give you an idea of how you might lay this out. So the different themes that I have is a 5-card spread, and I'll try and post a link maybe for you guys to take a look at a picture of the spread layout that I make up. And if you email me, I can also send it to you. Or if you comment on the video, I can also send you a copy of the spread layout as well. And I'll type up the questions and put them in the video description. Okay, so 5-card spread for the Venus and Leo cycle. The first thing that you could draw for the first card would be the central theme. So I'm going to draw a central theme for myself for this Venus and Leo cycle in Leo. I said Venus and Leo cycle in Leo. So redundant. Anyway, for this year and a half cycle, what is my central theme? All right. So for myself, I drew Page of Pentacles reversed. So I'm going to unpack some of this later. I think that's very interesting. That implies that there's a way that I need to get more grounded and develop more skills, but it's also reversed. So it could bring into question, where do I consider myself eternally a student, and it's time for me to grow into something more. So I think that'll be an interesting thing for me to examine and unpack. So that was the first card. The second card is the challenge of the cycle, and I would like use this as a crossing card. So if my central theme is Page of Pentacles reversed, what is my challenge? The thing that I need to integrate and work with throughout this cycle in order to deal with the Page of Pentacles reversed. And I got the Sun reversed. That is very interesting, considering Venus and Leo, to have the Sun reversed. By the way, I'm using my Morgan Greer mini deck here. I also find it very interesting that both of these are quite yellow. All right, so I've got the Page of Pentacles reversed as my main theme, Sun reversed as my main challenge. And then the third card that you would draw would be a gift that I have to share with the world, if you choose to do this spread that I've created. So a gift that I have to share with the world. So for myself, I got the 9 of Wands. Very interesting, also very yellow. And this is one of my key cards for the year, so I find that very interesting. It speaks to some kind of perseverance, kind of strength or fortitude that I have to share with the world. That's intriguing to me. Okay, and then the next card would be, where can I shine more? Oh, I got the Lovers. All right, so that could be talking about my own personal relationship, or it could be talking about that Eros energy that I was mentioning. That's interesting. I could shine more there. And the last card, what will help me to shine? And I got 2 of Wands reversed. So this is interesting. I've drawn 2 Wands cards, but that one is reversed. So I'm going to take time to journal and examine my own spread more and consider and refer back to this, especially when Venus is at the different gates. And I think there are different ways to integrate each of the gates, or each of the meetups with the moon that she will have during the cycle, during her morning star phase and her evening star phase. But to me, I would consider like this spread to be a central kind of theme and something that I could alchemize and work with through the whole year and a half, and especially the first half of the cycle. So the next 8 or 9 months, I think this would be especially useful to me, hypothetically. So again, if you want to try the spread, the 5 cards would be a central theme. That would be the first one. A challenge, which would be a crossing card. So central theme of this Venus in Leo cycle for you, a challenge. And then number 3, a gift that you have to share with the world. Number 4, where can I shine more? And number 5, and finally, what will help me to shine? So I hope you guys find this helpful. I hope you find it interesting. If you have stuck around this long, Goddess bless you. Thank you for sticking around. It means a lot to me, and maybe it means that you are interested in these Venus cycles, and I would love to keep unpacking them with you and talk about the cycle more as it progresses. And maybe I need to clarify some things because I rambled a lot in the first half of the video trying to describe things properly. Let me know how it landed, and let me know if you try the spread, and how you're doing with Venus retrograde. I hope you're doing okay. And I think that's it for now. Yeah. So I personally, again, I feel like it is a big part of my calling to integrate and embody Venus more, which again, I got that Lovers card, where can I shine more? So I take that as a confirmation. And so any way that I can help you to do that, any way that I can be a helpful Venusian light for you as a Venus morning star person, let me know. Because I would really like to do that. And for me, both in astrology and in music, which is my other big passion, I think Venus is front and center for me, and I want to grow her presence on this channel, both in a astrology way and in a creative way. So Let me know how I can serve you, and if you liked this, please like the video and subscribe, and stay tuned. Stay tuned for more. All right, sending you guys many Venus blessings. I love you, and keep shining, keep alchemizing. You're beautiful.